This is London calling North America. Next, we present London Letter by John Connell. Stand by for London Letter. This is London calling North America. The British Broadcasting Corporation presents London Letter, in which John Connell, novelist and editorial writer of one of London's daily newspapers, gives his comments on interesting happenings of the week.
This is John Connell from London. London Transport Executive is holding an exhibition of its posters, ranging back over 40 years. London Transport Executive, I ought to explain, is the big state corporation which runs London's buses, trams, trolleybuses, and underground railway system, the counterpart of the American subway or the Paris metro. For many years, their posters, and the posters of the big railroad companies, have been among London's most constant delights. Somebody once called these posters the poor man's art gallery. I'd say, too, they're the lazy man's, the busy man's, and the untravelled man's guide and key to the beauty and the charm of the country he lives in. In their own way, they're a remarkable manifestation of popular art, and in my own lifetime, they've developed enormously. When I was a very small boy, I can remember posters telling you of the attractions of seaside resorts. There'd be a plump pink lady and an insufferably hearty male companion prancing about against a background of vivid blue sea and ridiculously golden sand, and there'd be a legend saying that Mudport on the Ouse was so bracing. About 30 years ago, the change began, and when I was in my teens, I can remember some railroad posters that were an enchantment. There was one of the Rose Window in York Minster particularly, and another of the Mountains of Morn in Ulster, both of which stirred all kinds of romantic emotions and aspirations. If you ever see a bunch of modern British travel posters, don't please say cynically, "Oh, it couldn't possibly be like that." It could, and often is. Come and see for yourself, and look as much as you can through the artist's eyes and with his vision. And if I may add one more piece of very well-meant advice, know what to expect. You see, the secret of the magic of the English landscape is that it's seldom dramatic, sensational, and startling. It's the magic of the expected, the familiar, the orderly, and the civilized and the cozy. It's seldom grandiose. It nearly always speaks in agreeable, well-modulated, and self-deprecating accents. The reason for this is that the English and the English countryside have lived on terms of the closest familiarity and affection for centuries. The landscape, I'm speaking, you must realize, of England now, not of Scotland or Ireland or the mountainous parts of Wales. The English landscape has been tamed and humanized through many, many years of close association between the land and the people who live on it and work on it. There are few other countries in the world where the observer is so constantly, but so unobtrusively aware of this long-standing relationship. Holland is one such, Italy is another, and much of southern Germany. But in so many lands, you're immediately and sharply aware of an unrelenting tension of hostility. Man wrings his living from desert or mountain or steppe in the face of forces which would deny it to him if they could. Burning sunlight, biting wind, sandstorm, insidious jungle, famine and pestilence that lurk in menace beneath the bright colours of sky and sea and mountain. England's colours are subdued, soft greens and greys and blues, washed by showers, touched by pale sunshine, faintly shadowed by passing clouds. Even the big famous beauty spots of the normal tourist round of this country have this same reticence, this lack of shock and drama about them, this unemphatic intimacy. Think of the big names: Westminster Abbey, Oxford, Sowgrave Manor, Broadway, Sussex. And don't expect from any of them bigness, loudness, violent assertion of their quality. That quality, which is very rare and very enduring, never pushes itself on you. It steals on you. Just at the moment you're in danger of saying, but how small, how dull, and how colourless. Suddenly you realize the genius of those who built on this scale, with these materials of grey stone and soft brick, and they no longer seem careless and offhand. In architectural terms, they're as precise and as civilized as Edison's prose or Handel's music. Oxford, for example, which to most visitors to Britain is a very obvious magnet. What do you expect Oxford to be like? Posters and photographs can give you some idea of Oxford, but only of bits and pieces of Oxford. And yet this is just, because Oxford is an immense, incalculable collection of bits and pieces. The one thing Oxford perpetually refuses to be is a planned set piece. I believe it to be by far the best university in the world, but it's certainly not the model university city. So far as the university is concerned, and the university is only one aspect of Oxford, and in the view of many citizens nowadays, it's not its most important aspect. It's a conglomeration of colleges of various sizes and ages, and of a few buildings belonging to the university as a whole. Some of the colleges are extremely beautiful. One or two are as ugly as can be. One or two of the university buildings are beautiful, one or two are depressing. There's no uniformity, there's no unity. They all look as if they happened, quite casually, according to the whim or pleasure of a generation or an individual. The centuries jostle one another quite heedlessly. In my own college, Balliol, for example, an exquisite 15th century library has tacked alongside it a distressing row of turreted rooms, which look rather like a tenement building in Glasgow and were put up in a hurry 100 years ago. And around this queer huddle of colleges and quadrangles and narrow lanes, there sprawls, first, an ordinary English market town, and second, a large 20th century industrial and manufacturing city. The result is that there are practically no large-scale vistas of Oxford that are easily discoverable by the occasional visitor. If you come to Oxford by train, you see the dreaming spires and towers behind a screen of gasworks and truck sidings. If you come by road, you'll see them over a welter of factories and little suburban houses of no beauty. Yet, and I'm not being merely paradoxical, Oxford is incomparably beautiful. You have to go to look for the beauty, and you have to go to it in humility and understanding. For myself, I know that this month, April, is the time of year at which I like Oxford best. Undergraduates are away for the Easter vacation, and that makes the colleges in the centre of the city seem a good deal less noisy and crowded than they are in term time. The quiet distillations of the long centuries aren't, as it were, confused and stirred up by the troublous presence of the ebullient and transient young. But come to Oxford on an April afternoon and find your way down a twisting, high-walled lane, across two quadrangles, through some big wrought iron gates, and into New College Garden. The word new is an amiable misnomer. The college is one of the third or fourth most ancient in Oxford, and its garden is old and seasoned and tranquil. There's some very old gnarled trees. There's turf that's been rolled and mowed for centuries, and is like the softest, most closely woven green cloth. There's part of the ancient wall of the medieval city of Oxford. And in April, there are daffodils and primroses and primulas and fruit trees and flowering shrubs in full blossom. There's a very old tutor in a rusty black suit and a most unlikely straw hat, toddling rather grumpily around on his daily constitutional. There's a little red-cheeked gardener's boy whistling as he loads up a barrow. And quietly and completely, you realize what the real, abiding magic of this garden is. It is that there's no clash between youth and age, child and aged man, fragile flowers that'll last a week, and trees that have taken 200 years to reach maturity. All are steeped in a sense of timeless peace. For me, over more years now than I can readily count, the existence of this garden has been a consolation, a strong reassurance. It's the secret, perpetual heart of England. I went there in the spring of 1939, when we were all oppressed and grimly and confusedly aware of the dark threat that lay over our generation. And I went back there in the spring of 1945, after more than 4 years of exile and 6 of soldiering, and the garden was utterly unchanged. And I knew that the trials and sufferings of one man or one generation are only significant in the general pattern, and they can be more properly comprehended and more easily endured if they're seen against the background of something as universal as this garden. Each of you Americans, if I may speak very personally for a moment, and the last thing I want to do is either to lecture or to appeal, each of you Americans is at this moment in time in a position of peculiar ascendancy. And I don't mean simply financially. No, goodness knows in a battered and impoverished world that's important enough. And American financial strength and generosity are the two miraculous bulwarks which civilization possesses at present. But it has so happened that the material ruin and the moral havoc of Europe and of large parts of Asia haven't devastated your continent. You don't search, as we do constantly, for indications of security and continuity over the rim of the ruins. It helps greatly if over as wide a field as possible, you understand why we're so insistent on these two qualities. Under the Atlantic Pact, your nation and our nation, and a group of European peoples who've passed through similar trials and ordeals, have in the past few days bound ourselves in a new companionship, in yet another phase in the adventure which is human civilization. The restless, enduring, exploring side of man is balanced by the side of him which seeks peace, continuity, security, and union with the eternal and the universal. So it's been from the beginning. In the interplay of these two fundamental impulses, the creative and the adventurous on one side, and the contemplative and the mystical on the other, civilization has grown up and been sustained. No individual human being, no nation, no community of nations is complete without both these motive forces at work. The United States is in one of the great, bold, creative phases of human history. You need, and the world needs, to understand and to keep within reach and perspective all the immense accumulation of knowledge and wisdom and creative beauty which century by century civilized men have built up and maintained. This inheritance isn't only in books or in old masters. It isn't only in Gothic cathedrals or the majestic relics of antiquity. It's in so much else which appears casual and transient. In the songs people sing, in the tales and the legends they tell their children before the fire of an evening, in ordinary day-to-day crafts like building a cottage, thatching a roof, scything a field, or tending a garden. The real essence of human civilization is transmitted generation by generation through persistent, but seldom very obvious or imposing channels. And I believe that each of us, and it's not entirely fortuitous, each of us has the duty and the opportunity of keeping those channels open. That's why I told you about New College Garden. That's why I hope you'll go there. And why I hope you'll tell your children and your grandchildren to go there. It's much more important than the history books and the guidebooks. And this is John Connell signing off in London.
John Connell was speaking in the transcribed series London Letter. This is the British Broadcasting Corporation.